one of my favorite things about the NBA playoffs this year has been watching Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks. Number one, I mean, they are a young, cool team, and I love seeing them in a position where they're playing in meaningful basketball games. And frankly, winning series. They beat Philadelphia. They beat the Knicks. They went to New York and had cool moments there. And, they're now in the Eastern Conference Finals. I would imagine the road ends here. A lot of people thought they wouldn't even beat Philadelphia. So I'd be very shocked if somehow Atlanta, it would take like Giannis getting hurt, Chris Middleton getting hurt. I'd be shocked if Atlanta made it past to the Eastern Conference Finals. But, because they barely beat a dysfunctional Philadelphia. However, for Atlanta to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, that's enough. That feels like a very, very successful season. For that to be, that's an amazing year. That's a win for sure. And I got to say, man, it's just been such a blast to watch their journey. And they're a team that's been down for a couple of years now. And I can't help but look back at the draft day trade where, remember, the Atlanta Hawks drafted Luka Doncic, number 3 overall in 2018, and then immediately turned around and traded him to Dallas, who had drafted Trae Young, number 5 overall. And for lack of a better term, there was a brief period where, I guess the truth is that Luka found success quicker than Trae Young did. And there was a brief period where people I saw were critical, like, why would Atlanta draft, Trae Young? Why would Atlanta want Trae Young over Luka? And that's a bad move, and they look stupid. And well, here we are. Atlanta's winning. Trae looks awesome. And Trae Young is the face of the Atlanta Hawks, and it's really cool to see them do well. You can debate that trade for years. I'm sure we will. But the fact that Trae Young is panning out and doing very well, leading his team to winning multiple series, that's exciting. That's fun. And the 2021 NBA playoffs, for me, I've become a big fan of Trae Young. In round 1, Atlanta played the New York Knicks, and it was so cool to see. The crowd is amazing. They were rowdy. They were into it, and I love a good, mean New York crowd. Like, New York sports is a different thing. It's New York and Philadelphia are probably, Boston's up there. I think the East Coast, frankly, is just they're meaner. And I love it. If I ever was like a local sports radio host, I would want to work in Boston or New York or Philadelphia, where people care, they're passionate, they yell at you, and it was so cool. Cool is maybe the wrong word, but the New York Knicks fan base and their crowd was yelling, F you, Trae Young, chanting, F you, Trae Young. And they were not saying F you, they were saying blank, blank, Trae Young. And it's really cool watching the broadcast. Like, it was coming over the broadcast microphones, and they couldn't, the announcers like, we apologize for the vulgar language that the fans are yelling. It's like, nah, I don't care. I love that stuff. I think that's what makes sports really cool. And just imagine having all of Madison Square Garden, 18,000, 20,000 people yelling F you and then your name, chanting your name, F you, Trae Young, F you, Trae Young. And Trae Young leaned into it. Man, he enjoyed that moment. In game 1, he hit the game-winning shot, and he literally he shushed the crowd, and you're like, oh, yes, he's not afraid. Some people in that moment, I think, would have a hard time, and I don't know how Ben Simmons would handle a moment like that where he wouldn't. Ben Simmons couldn't handle that moment, frankly. Trae Young did, and to see him rise to the occasion and kind of take the hate as a compliment and say, oh, you're doing that because you think I'm good and you want me to fail. And he embraced being the villain, and this is a bad comparison. I almost shouldn't say it because it's not quite fair, but it reminded me of the ESPN 30 for 30 with Reggie Miller versus Spike Lee. And I feel like it does a disservice to compare it to that, because the Reggie Miller moment felt way more epic. And I don't want to take anything away from that Reggie Miller moment years ago in the playoffs where Reggie Miller was the villain in the Garden. But it did have a similar vibe where this guy is the new villain and somebody spit on him. And it's just like, I just really enjoyed the way Trae Young handled that moment. For the dude to be 22 years old and really thriving under that kind of pressure, I made me a fan for life. And the end of the series got chippy, and Julius Randle got a flagrant foul at the end of the game. And Atlanta won in 5 games, though. Atlanta won round 1 against New York in 5 games. They moved on to Philly, and it's kind of crazy. Trae Young took on crowds in Philly and New York, like 2 of my favorite, their most passionate fan bases in sports. I'm sure like there's some European soccer fan bases that are crazy too, but Philly, Boston, New York, and America, those are like the ones you're like, man, those people care a lot, and they will yell at you, and they're angry. And this Atlanta Hawks team won the series against Philly in 7 games. And you're like, oh, man. To take on Philly, the Philadelphia 76ers were the number 1 seed in the East. They had the best record in the Eastern Conference. And there was a moment before Game 4 where Philly led the series 2-1. And go listen to the broadcast. I encourage people to go, if you have a DVR and recorded it or something, go find the broadcast. Because before the game, people were talking about how, Philly leads 2-1 and Game 4 is in Atlanta, and then Game 5 will be back in Philadelphia. And there was an expectation that the 76ers were going to win Game 4 in Atlanta and then go back home to Philly and finish off the series and end things in Game 5. Nobody expected Atlanta to win that Game 4, and then they did. And the series was tied 2-2. And then in Game 5, Philly was up 22 points at halftime. In fact, we just more than, it was like 3 minutes and 25 seconds or some change like that. With about 3 minutes left in the third quarter, Philadelphia was up over Atlanta by 25 points. And they somehow found a way to lose the game. Trae Young started making shot after shot after shot. And just, it was impressive. And then to go along with that, Philadelphia completely collapsed. They made mistake after mistake, and they couldn't make shots, and it was bad possession after bad possession. And eventually, Atlanta, this team, this young team that wasn't supposed to win that series, wound up winning in 7 games. And yeah, look, Philadelphia is dysfunctional. They certainly, Philadelphia had moments where they should have taken the series and they didn't. But to see Atlanta do so well, especially again, given the recent years that the Atlanta Hawks fan base has gone through, it's so much fun to see this young team doing so well. And in Game 7, by the way, Trae Young was not the star. Remember, Trae Young was drafted number 5 overall in 2018. Well, Atlanta drafted number 19 overall in 2018, a guy named Kevin Huerter. He had 27 points in Game 7. He's also a guy who's 22 years old. So it's just a fun, young basketball team, probably overachieving. But no matter what happens from here on out, the fact that the Atlanta Hawks are in the Eastern Conference Finals, I can't say it enough. It's been a fun run. It made me a big fan of Trae Young. It actually does not shock me at all that he went to Oklahoma with Baker Mayfield. The way, like, there's a similar moment where Baker Mayfield in the NFL loves that pressure, loves that to be the villain. And I got the same vibe from Trae Young, a guy who's not afraid of the spotlight, not afraid in fact, he wants to take the final shot, there are people out there. I'm looking at Ben Simmons who does not want the ball at the end of a game. And the fact that Trae Young has that kind of instinct and that kind of attitude of, give me the ball, I'll take on 20,000 people chanting, F you, Trae Young. I love watching the Atlanta Hawks. It's been such a blast to get to know this team and to follow this team throughout the playoffs. And then I guess one more final thing I want to talk about, if I'm going to talk about Atlanta, like another cool part of their story is their head coach, Nate McMillan. So Atlanta fired their head coach midseason and then promoted Nate McMillan to be the head coach on March 1st, earlier in the year. And he's coached before. He was head coach of the Seattle Sonics at one point. He coached in Portland. I remember him when I was growing up. I grew up in the Portland area, seeing Nate McMillan coaching games. He also coached in Indiana for the Pacers. And with Nate McMillan as their head coach, Atlanta took a big step forward. Their point differential went from minus 65 to positive, plus 114. And their defensive efficiency went from last in the NBA to second, which is that's a dramatic jump in of itself. But also their shooting got better. They started winning more. And if you're going to talk about Atlanta, you have to bring up the impact Nate McMillan has had on this basketball team, because he really is a big part of the story of why Atlanta has done so well. And I think, frankly, again, I love this team. I love Trae Young, but they've overachieved. They probably, I would be beside myself if they beat the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals, and then there's no way they beat Phoenix, right? I would be shocked. But the fact they got to where they are and the way they've done it, the storyline is so cool. It's so fun. They're a young team. I think I've said that like 20 million times in this topic, but I love Trae Young. I love the Atlanta Hawks, and they made me a fan of them. I've always been like, Trae Young, we'll see. And his attitude, the way he handled that crowd in New York is something that will always stick with me. And that I felt like I got introduced to who Trae Young is and how he's going to handle moments throughout his hopefully long career ahead of him. And I've had such a blast in NBA playoffs watching and following the Atlanta Hawks.